Mark, states are tripping over themselves right now to get every single dime they can. It's all a greedy push, no matter how you get to it. And I love it how everybody always talks about the fact that we're going to educate, we're going to help the gamblers, we're going to make sure that everybody is taken care of, and don't worry about it. There'll be safeguards here, and we're going to help education. The rampant amount of stunning, incredible, overflowing bullshit from all of these people is astounding while they're trying to get as much money as they possibly can. And look, I'm not against wagering. Look, there was a time, and I'm sure that you're there as well, when we couldn't talk about it on the air. When I was doing talk shows in Miami a billion years ago, we were told never mention the odds, don't talk about gambling, don't talk about the over-under numbers, whatever. And now, of course, it's on the lower third crawl just about everywhere you go. The point here, though, Mark, is I do believe we've already gotten to a point where there is a generation that is growing up in sports that no longer gives a shit about whether or not somebody's got 30 home runs or makes a great play at second base or a great catch in the end zone. What they're worried about is their fantasy leagues, whether or not the over-under was covered, and whether or not I can make money. We're really raising a generation of sports fans, even in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and let's go to the 50s now. They don't care about sports if gambling's not involved.
I'm going to tell you a funny story. Just this time yesterday, 24 hours ago, I'm at a minor league baseball game, and I'm sitting next to a couple of millennials, Gen Xers, whatever they are, 20-somethings, maybe early 30-somethings. And one of them is supposed to be essentially charting pitches for one of the teams that's playing. And in between innings, he is thumbing through his phone, looking for racetracks that he can bet on a Monday, which is interesting because in the New York, New Jersey area, generally the racetracks are closed on Monday. And I think the first one he found was Parks down in Philadelphia. And he was excited, like beyond excited. Forget that he's, getting paid to work in baseball, but he was beyond excited that he found Parks racetrack that he could gamble on the ponies.
And this is while he's working.
And this is while he's working, ostensibly. Yeah, it was stark to me. But, I live in Jersey. I've lived in Jersey for most of my life. And I remember when gambling and the casinos opened in Atlantic City. And the whole thing about, we're going to revitalize Atlantic City. And it's going to be, it's going to be Las Vegas East. And it's going to be a gleaming paradise. And we all know how that turned out. And honestly, I haven't been back to Atlantic City now in probably 25 years.
I'm going to just inject right here that for anybody who's never been, Atlantic City is one of the biggest shitholes in America. And I'm sure the people in Atlantic City won't be happy, but yeah, the boardwalk is nice every now and then, but gambling took what was a really fun part of the beach and part of a lot of us who grew up in the Northeast as part of our generational learning about life, and it really has turned it into a shithole. And it never recovered, and it's not any better now.
No, and they're supposed to be pumping all kinds of, tax monies into it, and you would never be able to tell, driving through that's what's going on. It doesn't look very much better than it did 40 years ago. And I honestly, I think the last time I was down there was for the Tyson Spinks fight, which, if memory serves, was 1988. Wow. So honestly, I have not been back in that long. I just have noticed I'm not a big gambler. I have no desire to go. But as it relates to this conversation, I think what happened was, the leagues saw the popularity explosion. You mentioned the fantasy teams. Fantasy football, obviously, in a manner of speaking, took the ball and ran from where rotisserie baseball had sort of led it. And now, you've got listen, with the red zone channels for the NFL, that only, enhances what's happening here. And of course, you've got gambling ads everywhere. And frankly, as a broadcaster, having seen what the economy and what the world has done to the broadcast advertising market, thank God we have the gambling sites, because they are, funding most of the radio stations that you and I listen to every day. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Now, obviously, where the gray area comes in is they have continued to tell them, and the NFL has had a problem with this. They've suspended another handful of players, anywhere from a few games to a full season for gambling on the NFL. They tell you can't gamble. And of course, you and I are all too familiar with the Pete Rose story. And, it's just about this time every year that the discussion comes up about whether Pete should be allowed back in baseball's good graces. And I don't know where you stand on it. And if you want to get into this discussion, I'm happy to have it. But I am a
You better be
firm
careful, man.
NO.
This will be a 3-hour show, brother, because
Yeah,
that's one of the things that always just kind of sits there. But go ahead and finish. And
I have, it seemed to me, and it's still there on the doors of these clubhouses when you walk into a baseball locker room in big, bold print, bigger than anything else. I used to joke you could see it from the space shuttle. It says no gambling. And that's rule one. If you violate rule one, then you are disqualified. And, to have lied about it as long as he did, and then to have admitted, okay, I did it in order to, further his profits from his own books.
Here,
Sorry,
okay,
no.
let's cap this and then we'll move on. But I'll say this:
Okay.
Pete Rose never gets into Cooperstown until he admits, which he has. I always said that over and over again. But he has to look into the camera and admit, I bet on baseball, I bet on the Reds. And then the next thing is, on his plaque, it says, Pete Rose, Hall of Famer, banned from baseball for gambling on the game and not admitted until he admitted, not inducted until he admitted that he gambled. I want it right there to show everybody what a lying son of a bitch that Pete Rose has been his entire life. I want it there in his face.
I don't think that's strong enough. I think when you accept a permanent ban, I don't know what permanent means to you. It may not be the same as what it means to me.
Doesn't
but
mean
to
anything
me, permanent
anymore.
means forever, and you're not going in. You're banned from baseball. You're banned from consideration for the Hall of Fame. That's it.
But here's
and
the
it's
argument,
a lifetime
though,
ban. So come see us after you're no longer here.
The argument, and it's, look, whether it's germane or not to a conversation on this, but there are those who will say that, well, how can you keep Pete Rose out if Major League Baseball and every other sport is now making billions of dollars on gambling? You've allowed it in. The answer is it was not allowed then. That's the difference. And we're also then talking about something entirely different. But wait, maybe we're not, because now, thanks to gambling and the greed of states and the greed of networks and the greed of the leagues, we are now looking at a point where the National Football League is facing this. Players who are gambling on the games, who are breaking the overall rules that are set. To me, these players, the moment you are found gambling on premises or the moment you're found gambling in violation of the rules, you're out. Period. That's it. You're never playing again in the National Football League. And now there's your permanent ban that needs to come back in here.
Right.
But then again, the fans are going to scream, well, you can't do that because you're making money off gambling. It's a dichotomy, Mark, that we really can't work from.
It's not, because you're telling the athletes and especially the manager, listen, Pete was managing the Reds. And I've heard the arguments, well, he didn't bet every game on the Reds. But you know what? The games he didn't bet on the Reds was a signal to the people that he was involved with not to take the Reds, because he knew he had put them in a spot where they weren't set up to win that game. So I don't want to hear it. He had a bigger finger on the pulse of that game than anybody else did at the time. He had a bigger impact on the outcome as a manager than anybody else. And listen, if you don't want to tell me that the managers have an outcome, don't have an impact on the game, then lay off Aaron Boone and lay off Buck Showalter, and enough with the fire these guys. Because you're telling me in one breath that they have everything to do with winning and losing, and in another you're telling
you're telling me that they have nothing to do with it.
Right. So you can't have it both ways. As far as the players go in the NFL, listen, the league says you cannot gamble on football. If you gamble on football, you suffer the consequences.
And but the consequences are bullshit, because it's a couple of weeks here and there. It's a couple of games. That's nonsense. If you're going to do it and have a rule on this, make it clear. I don't care if it's football, baseball, basketball, hockey, soccer, golf, tennis. I don't care. You bet on the game in violation of the rules that are set, you are out. That's it. The problem with it is, and you and I both know, you get the players' associations in there, and while I'm a big union guy, I'm a member of SAG-AFTRA, and I'm on strike right now, that while unions are a good thing, the unions have to back up and say, you broke a rule. It's right here. It's black and white. Stop. There's no surrender. You're out.
Yeah, the thing, though, is they have to put that in the CBAs, in the collective bargaining agreements,
what
exactly the punishments are. That's not there yet. All they have right now is a rule that says you cannot gamble on football, but it doesn't specifically spell out what the infraction will incur. And that's one of the issues that I think people are arguing about. Is how come one guy gets 3 games, one guy gets 6 games, one guy gets a whole season, et cetera, et cetera. But again, we've gone so far past the point of no return. You can't now say, okay, we're not going to get in bed with the gamblers. And you and I, again, we both remember when, was it Willie Mays and Mickey Mantle were basically banned from baseball or participating in anything to do with Major League Baseball because they were spokespeople for
Spokesman.
casinos
Yep.
for a time. And we also remember, and it was before my time and probably yours, when the likes of Paul Hornung and a few other NFL guys were suspended for an entire season because they had been just associating with gamblers. And that was a huge thing back in Joe Namath's day. There was a whole issue with Joe Willie that he was going to be banned from the NFL around, I think it was the time of the merger, because he was consorting with known gamblers. And, the
Well, but see, and you're
blood,
bringing
the
up the
blight
point here that
that
everybody
brought to
talks
the
about. What's the big
NFL.
deal about players gambling on games? The big deal is once the players get themselves involved, no matter how much money they have, and let's go back. Look, I grew up in New York City. You live in New York City. We've all grown up there. And I'm going to be very clear about this. My grandfather, God rest the man's soul, at his shop in Greenwich Village, was a guy who basically allowed a lot of the money to be kept in mailboxes in the back of his office right there, which used to go to a lot of the numbers runners across Greenwich Village. That's the way people made money back then. It was illegal as hell, sure it was, but it was almost doing business as normal. But even I learned from guys back then that once you have somebody hooked into a gambling debt, you got them. And then you can twist them, and then you can make them do what you want. And we've seen that happen before in sports. Let's go to the Tim Donaghy incident and issue and so many others. Once you get involved and get hooked with the gamblers, it's not all above board. It's not all sitting and going to Bally's or going to Caesars or any of that nonsense. They got your hooks in you, and you better do it what they want, or you then can be involved in certain things which can be painful. But they can also be involved in changing the scope and the games themselves. That's what people don't understand. They think it's no big deal. Hey, look, the guy's worth $45 million. He's out there busting a couple of bucks here and there. Guess what? A lot of that money's not guaranteed. A lot of that money sits in bank accounts they'll never touch. A lot of that money disappears to a lot of different things such as child support, wedding support, marital support, other debts that they roll up to. Look, how many guys have we seen, you and I over our years, really great athletes who get paid shitloads of money, and it's gone in no time because they're basically handing out cash to people. Just here, have a few $1,000,000 here and there. It still happens. But I think what happens here, Mark, is though the fan doesn't realize what goes on beneath the scenes. They can change the games. But I wonder if the fans care anymore.
That's been the argument forever, though, is that once the integrity of the games gets called into question,
there's the word,
then you can't have the sport. And you certainly can't have gambling on a sport in which the integrity is compromised. And that's the be-all, end-all for me, is, if you don't think these things are legit, then what's the point of watching? What's
but I don't think fans care anymore, Mark. I think that's it. I think that there's a subculture of fans these days that are so engrossed in the gambling and the wagering side of it that they don't think about the integrity of the games, and they don't care. Because as long as my parlay pays off, as long as my over-under bet is good, and as long as I win the inning, I'm okay. Hey, integrity? Stop. It's not a big deal because I'm making money. That's my biggest fear here, is I think we are now working into a culture, and you see it at the college level a lot right now with organized gambling in a lot of ways, that as long as I'm able to wager on the game, that makes me care about the game. I don't care about anything else other than winning my bet. That frightens me a little bit as to where we're going.
You should also be concerned that you should also be concerned that if the odds, so to speak, are being swung nefariously, that your chances of winning that bet are greatly diminished. So you should definitely care if you're gambling on these games. You should care more than anything. Forget about the lines and the point spreads and everything else. You should care about the integrity, that everything is on the up and up so that you have a fair shake at winning your bets.
And the thing about cities and states, rather states getting involved is, I am just done with the bullshit hearing from people in places like North Carolina and other places. We care about the addictive gambler. We're going to make sure that we have programs and safeguards to help you. Nonsense. Addictive gambling is on the rise in this country right now. It is ruining lives. The states don't give a shit because all they care about is the revenue that's walking into their pockets. Look, you heard the governor of North Carolina. Hey, they're doing it up in Vermont. They're doing it up in other places right now. We better get on the stick or we're losing all this money right now, which we didn't have a shot at before. And when I hear them talk about things such as safeguards and education, I laugh uproariously because it's all about the greed, Mark. They they
Well,
don't care if
and
anybody's out there hurting their lives. If somebody out there manages to plunge their brains out and lose their house and cost their kids their futures, don't worry about it. Hey, look at the money we're making over here.
that's where we need the concerned, representatives in government to really hold the power to account, and it doesn't happen enough,
But they
obviously,
won't
and
because
it
it's
doesn't happen in a
money.
lot of places. Right.
It's money.
Well,
It's
I
it's
mean,
it's all
what
about
can
it's all about it's all, it's like
what can we
finding
do to
free
fix it?
money.
Right. But if we don't have integrity, what can we do to fix it? If we're an integrityless society, and I don't think we are completely without integrity, but if we are trending in that direction where it's getting to the point where nobody cares about anything except, I want to win my bet and my state wants to bring in money from me betting, when you're at cross purposes, nothing gets done.
I
And
think that's what.
we've seen Atlantic City is not the gleaming metropolis they promised us. It's not the
Oof.
Xanadu that we were promised 40 years ago, or even longer now. Um, what can you do? All you can do is either, like I do, ignore it entirely. Maybe go down to the sub shop, very famous sub shop off the boardwalk is still there, and from what I understand, just as good as ever. But other than that, what can you do except shake your head and find something that you enjoy doing that you can stomach.
I want to give you big chops for using the word Xanadu. Very nice.